And welcome into another episode of Tiger Territory, part of the Foul Territory Network, a Detroit Tigers podcast. I'm Kieran Steckley. With me, as always, the man who believes there's no S in RBI. He is Cody Stavenhagen. How you doing?
It's true. I'm not a big fan of the S. Have to adhere to it though. It's in our style guide, so I do have to write that sometimes. It bothers me every time.
I don't know if you guys saw, but it was a little fun back and forth between the John Boy boys and Aaron Boone on their podcast talking about it. So that was the inspiration for that. Also, we are recording this in the midst of a Twitter meltdown. We're not going to talk about it, but the Tigers had a very exciting game that if you probably might have missed if you weren't watching on TV because your Twitter account was probably flooded with other stuff, and we'll leave it at that. Tigers dropped
I'm
an
not up on this. I haven't been on Twitter. Now I'm very curious. Now I'm distracted.
had the opposite effect. The Tigers we're recording this shortly after the Tigers dropped an extra inning game to the Chicago White Sox, split a series down at the South Side before playing the North Side team in Detroit for the weekend. We'll talk about that a little bit later. It felt a little bit to me, Cody, like I'm not going to come over here and like overreact. You split a series. It's not the end of the world. But if there was a tight race at the end, am I going to think back to an extra inning loss against the White Sox? With respect to them, they can be spunky. Like they're playing hard at this point in the year still.
The White Sox are bad, Kieran. The White Sox are terrible. Come on. Come on.
Look, I'm trying to be respectful here. All right, like I like their manager. They just had this momentum with this sale announcement today. That's something else that happened on Twitter. But this was a game that I feel like you're going to be able to look back on if it's like you're a game up in the last weekend and you're just like, oh man, remember that one? Yeah, I remember that one because you had Gleyber Torres take a call at third strike. You had a fly out with Torque there at extra innings. You had two on in the extra inning, and you can't get anybody home. And then sack, intentional walk, sack, bunt, single, and all of a sudden you got yourself a loss. And again, it's a split series. I'm not trying to overreact. That's a game that I feel like they're probably going to look back and say, probably should have had that one. Casey Mize was not dealing, and still you only down 2 runs. Like you feel like that was a game that you could have like earned yourself a gritty win. This didn't happen today, though.
Yeah, I mean it was pretty laborious for Casey Mize. Went 4 and 2 2/3 innings through 93 pitches. He never really had it going. In a way, he walked 4 guys and you limit him to 2 earned runs. You almost feel good about that. But there's a little bit of a grind, so you're down there for a second, and not a ton of opportunities. 1 for 6 with runners in scoring position. 9 guys left on base, so you had some chances, just didn't convert, just didn't come through with the big hit. That's going to happen sometimes. But it is a 4 game series with the White Sox. You're not really leaving feeling good about splitting with the White Sox. Your other loss, was a bullpen game. You're almost kind of like, all right, let's just hope we can get through this one. Um, but it really the last 3 games in Chicago, they won kind of in some classic like gritty Tigers style Wednesday night, but the last 3 games against Chicago, maybe not your best pitching performances, and it wasn't like the bats were just clicking on all cylinders either. This is gonna happen, but like I guess it's hard to talk about the Tigers right now because they're so good, but we're also like rational, so we're not gonna be like, oh, you split series with the White Sox, you suck, this is unacceptable. We're not gonna do that. But it's also like, really, really, you couldn't take 3 or 4 from the White Sox.
Yeah, here's the thing. For you throw like it mirrored the. That's why I said deja vu earlier. Like it kind of mirrored the Kansas City experience a little bit. I know they won that series, but like, did you feel like outside like the majority of the series they were playing their best baseball? No, I wouldn't say that. And then certainly outside of game 1 of this series, do you feel like they were playing like best team in baseball? Baseball?
Mm.
No, I wouldn't say that. And that happens over the course of 162 games. Like we all understand these things, but it's not wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing baseball to watch. I mean, you're a couple inches away from dropping that game Wednesday probably, and therefore like this becomes like a 3-1, the other way. So like then maybe we'd have to have some larger emotional outbursts. We'll save that for another time, perhaps. But in regards to the game today, like there were some other like kind of sluggishness that just kind of pops out of the screen for me. All right, like and I don't even mean this as a criticism as much as an observation. Like an example, Kerry Carpenter, hits that ball that gets misplayed at second base. He's obviously not hustling because he's preserving his hamstring. Like we all understand that, but it plays into the overall octave of
Thick.
the sluggishness there, a little tongue tied there for a second. And then the opposite, it feels like maybe there are some guys who have fresh legs. Parker Meadows, one of them, makes another diving catch today. So that was fun to see. Wenzel Perez gets on and then tries to go first to third on a single that he had no business actually like going to third on that play. Like it was too close to guarantee that was going to drop. And then he even stopped at second base and he was out by a mile. This is not me over here doing playing the result stuff with the aggressive baseball.
Yeah.
But it felt like was trying to do a little spark action right there. Probably seeing what's going on around the team. And obviously his legs are fresher than the majority of the guys on the squad. And he does have the home run later and, provides that spark as well. But at the same time, like it felt like that might have been the result of what we had seen over the course of the week. And now White Sox in the rear view, you got to look at the Cubs. It's just a lot of kind of moving parts here. Not panicky, not overly like,
Yeah.
but
The,
they're not playing their best version of themselves right now.
the series, I think we've squeezed all the juice out of that we can, right? The series was what it was. You leave it with kind of a meh feeling about it. But we did have some bigger picture kind of important things happen, right? The return of Parker Meadows, we talked about that some on our last episode. Sawyer-Gipson Long back in the big leagues. Colt Keith is a third baseman again, at least partially. So I think all three of those things are some important developments. We saw right away what Parker can bring to the team. Sawyer-Gipson Long, I also talked about like I like him. I think he's going to be a good pitcher. It is just like it feels like a lot is on his plate, maybe a little sooner than you would hope, maybe as a result of a couple other guys being on the injured list. And that's kind of what it felt like his first outing. He got right out there on the mound and punched out Mike Talkman and threw a nasty changeup. Is like, oh, this is what the Tigers have been raving about. But then, flash forward a couple innings, it was like, well, kind of looks like a guy who hasn't pitched in almost 2 years. That was really my only grand takeaway. The stuff plus was still pretty good. You can tell he has 3 to 4 solid major league offerings. There's a lot to like, but it just didn't feel refined. It felt like a guy coming straight off Tommy John, which I guess is what I feared. But the good news is, if that's the baseline, maybe it'll be a little bit choppy for a second, but eventually it's going to smooth out. And I think kind of the question is like, how long is that going to take?
Sure, unanswerable. One of the I agree. I didn't have like anything overarching. Probably, I thought he handled the rain delay element pretty well, considering like your first. By the way, that was only like what his fifth major league start of his career.
Something like that, yeah.
So like talk about just being like young in so many ways. I thought like that kind of stuff he handled well, and then he, like you said, pitched like a guy that was still pretty fresh off Tommy John surgery. And would he be here had it not been for some other stuff? And then, coming off a bullpen day, obviously when you only go 3.2, you got to use some arms there. And then like, that's kind of, if you're going to say something good about Casey Mize, that's where it helps a lot, because he went deeper into that game than it really looked like, quite frankly, he was going to be able to. The first couple innings, I don't want to say save bullpen arms, but like, preserved a little bit there, considering what it could have been. And I did have one thing to say about Casey Mize. It kind of reminded me of beginning years of this podcast where maybe like him and Manning would have these outings where you're just like you just tell you're just off a beat, and then you got to
Right.
try to figure out a way. And I'm not going to sit here and brag about his outing, but he figured out a way to go, like I said, longer, deeper into the game.
It
Uh,
felt like a last year Casey Mize outing for
yeah,
sure.
and
Hmm.
not representative of like what his baseball card stats are to this point. Well, we will get to some of the other storylines, bigger picture stuff as Cody laid out there, but first, a word from our sponsors.
If you're a card collector or you'd like to get into card collecting, may I suggest Arena Club and slab packs, which means that you can rip the packs digitally and, of course, get the card that you want. It's also the most trusted name in the game, and I would rather rip packs these days on my phone than sit next to you and have you grabbing one of my physical packs if I was grabbing one.
Yeah,
In the old days.
you don't need me grabbing your packs, because last time you grabbed one, it ended up like this card. So let's not have that, and that's why Arena Club is great. They send them to you in these fancy protectors like this Scout Brown card that we have here, and they'll come safe. They're already graded, or you could do like I do and just leave my cards in the showroom and never actually see them physically.
Yeah.
But they're safe, protected, and if I want to sell them, I can.
Buy, sell, trade. They offer full transparency, showing every card in the slab pack with the likelihood of pulling each one, so you know exactly what's available before you buy. Get 20% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/FAL and use code FAL.
All right, coming back here. Let's talk about that Colt Keith third base thing for a second, because that's one of those, like, it happened so quickly. And of course it's
Yeah.
like it gets like kind of put out there before a day game, and AJ in his utmost wisdom is not just going to throw something out there without somewhat of a plan to make it happen in some way. It wasn't going to linger on everybody's minds for all that long. And Colt Keith gets in there. All I heard for the past several years was that his shoulder, his arm is like, I don't want to say a problem, but something that they were conscious of overall with like how they were going to use him in the field. Because we had talked about, could you get him a spot in a corner somewhere potentially or whatever. This is over the past couple of years we had this conversation, and that's why, like, if you're going to sign a Gleyber Torres, the only option for Colt Keith in the field, as of at the time, was first base. Now, I guess you could say his usage has expanded a little bit if he's going to be able to play some spot third. Third continues to be a revolving door of possibilities this season, Cody. But how did you kind of take that, given all you've heard for years about Colt Keith, and then what you've seen, spring training, before game drills, and just the way people talk about it. Now all of a sudden, this is like a possibility, something that if I could say one thing semi-critical, really, if this is a possibility now, there's no reason it couldn't have been a possibility almost at any other time. So,
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I mean, we'd heard a lot like he hurt his shoulder, right? He's just not really capable of making that throw anymore. Maybe it's not a good fit for him post shoulder injury. That's kind of what the narrative was. Well, Colt said, a couple of years of rehabbing that shoulder injury, it's in a better place now. Colt said it. I believe it. In a way, like I've stood pretty close up to infield drills. Colt Keith still has a pretty good arm when he wants to. Like, I think he has a better arm than Jace Young, although I haven't seen him throw from third in a while. I've seen them both throw from second. I can tell you which one just has more zip on it eye test wise. It's Colt Keith. So in a way, I don't think he's incapable of playing third, but in a way, he was never a very good third baseman to begin with. And then they moved him to second, and he wasn't a very good second baseman, but he was getting better. And then he moved to first, and he's not been a very good first baseman. And now you're going to move back to third, and that seems to open the door to maybe move Jace Young back to second, which is his better position. It's kind of like this is this big circle, and I don't know how to feel about it. Like in the early days of the AJ Hinch era, before anyone was paying attention to him, I wasn't a big fan of the whole versatility thing. Because I just feel like that's asking a lot of players, especially young players, developing players. It's something else to focus on. It's something else to worry about. It's not necessarily that easy from the player perspective. I think of Nick Castellanos complaining about how much he was jerked around early in his career. And guess he was. Is that fully explain why he's not a good defensive outfielder? Probably not, but is there something to it? I'm inclined to think maybe so. So Colt Keith, he's been jerked around position wise, but that's also this team's MO is you're going to have to play multiple positions. They've kind of turned this into a thing and proven it can work to the point that you don't want to knock it too much. I just think it's strange. Another option would have been Gleyber Torres going to play third base. It is great because what this does is it solves the dilemma of how are you getting Colt, Gleyber, Carey, Torque all in the same lineup. Especially now that you have Winslow and Parker and more guys capable of playing the outfield. It solved that. So I like it from that perspective. Gleyber, I don't know. I tend to think wherever he goes, it would still benefit him to have third base in his tool bag. But it sounds like the Tigers don't think Gleyber Torres would be a good defensive third baseman. I think the arm in particular, they don't think would really play at third base. Still makes me wonder, would it be worse than Colt Keith? I don't know. So I don't know if I laid out any compelling case or thought one way or the other. It's kind of this big, complicated wheel of discussion, and you write that on the whiteboard, and it actually looks pretty good. I guess I just hope Colt Keith is not going to be thrown off by how many different things have been asked of him, this early in his career.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, because I was explaining recently to somebody about just like the positional, like basically the right side of the field dilemma that you want all those bats in the lineup, and you have more guys, so you got to use the DH spot, and blah blah blah, like you just explained, and then potential solution just happens like a day later, right after I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But it's still something that, again, like I said, in theory, could have been done almost any time. Obviously, we're going to do that in spring training because you didn't know. Torque was maybe him taking to a corner infield spot made them think like, okay, that's something more comfortable. I know deal. Like I'm just thinking out loud here. Like the other piece of it though is like, so like if you're gonna do something like this, like who or what is that an indictment of? That kind of got me thinking. Like it's I guess maybe it's an indictment that whatever Jace is doing in AAA, they don't see him as like some sort of immediate solution, could, should something arise, because like, Dan talked about on the radio, we're at a point right now watching this Tigers team where there's some roster squeezing going to be going on here, like Trey.
Aaron, I think it's linked to Trey Sweeney.
So like, yeah, I guess we can kind of transition it there because I mean, that was the pinch hit today, right? Yeah. So like Sweeney has been fighting it, is a nice way to put it, at the plate. He had a good little stretch right when we were talking about it. And then since then he's been really cool. And I don't know what the obvious answer is. You have Javi Baez in your back pocket for multiple reasons, but he was also a guy that you can play at third and in a lot of situations and kind of know what you're getting there. Now all of a sudden with this roster squeeze, there's a little bit more wild card element to the lineup every day, which is funny because then we begin the week talking about, oh yeah, here's the usual lineup. It looks so good. And now we get third base and Javi back at shortstop. I don't know, potentially somewhat of an everyday guy who potentially, I don't know. Like
it seems possible. I mean, Javi's gonna have to hit too, though. He's cooled way off. But Colt Keith has been playing much better baseball, kind of like we talked about before, like quietly, probably not getting enough credit for how well he has been hitting it over the past month or so. This game is going to continue to ebb and flow. Last time we started to worry about Trey Sweeney, he had a really hot stretch. I still think that's a fair concern, and I do think this is probably somewhat linked to Trey Sweeney. You can get him out of the lineup. You can play Javi or McKinstry at third. Okay, who's going to play third? Like this right now does get your best players all in the game at the same time. So again, on the whiteboard, you have to like it for that reason. Maybe the bigger concern, though, Kieran, is Trey Sweeney. They kind of got to get this guy going again. The Tigers are a better team when he can be in there at shortstop. He hasn't graded out particularly well defensively either, which is certainly worth noting. Again, when you start talking what could happen at the trade deadline, there are going to be a few factors that I think will influence how aggressive the Tigers are in pursuing a bat, and whether or not you really trust Trey Sweeney to be your shortstop most days is going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, and speaking of the whiteboard stuff, we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on it because I think we did a good rundown. But the Ibanez piece of it is also something that it's continuing to linger. You can go back and watch how I broke it down and said it's just not like that many options right now. You have to go outside the organization most likely. Not saying that something that can't happen or shouldn't happen or whatever. It just doesn't really feel like a early June move. You know what I mean? Like,
I think you're right, but yeah. Last time we talked, it was like, well, he still has a 741 OPS against lefties. It's not Indy Bonds, but that's pretty good. The OPS against lefties down to 680, which is no longer, what you can upgrade from that. I don't know if you have an immediate internal upgrade other than maybe Jahan, who doesn't have the positional versatility, but that's all to say the Ibanez thing does remain a conversation.
Well, I feel like that was fun, but a little gloomy, I don't want to be that gloomy because this is still a 40-something win team. But I do have a fun topic to kind of wrap up our week, Cody. But first, a word from our sponsors.
Hey, if you want to keep the conversation going after a show that you're listening to on the FT network, then head to Chat BCC. AJ's on there.
I'm on there right now, typing away. I'll be there. We'll be there all the time, talking about what topics people want to discuss, what everyone wants to hear us talk about on Foul Territory.
Yeah, if you have a question, we can answer it on FT or on an FT team show on the network. So if you want to come crash our group chat, it's as easy as sending a text. Head to foulterritory.chat to start chatting with FT hosts and the FT fam.
All right, coming back here, I do want to give some credit to the New York Yankees for a second because they are, still one of the best teams in baseball, certainly the American League, and no Giancarlo Stanton, which I'm sure that's polarizing for a lot of people, but still he's out. And then the Garrett Cole thing out. They lose Juan Soto in free agency. I know, allowed them to get some pieces, but Paul Goldschmidt's doing well. Max Fried, obviously awesome. So I want to give them credit, but they are missing a couple guys from last year's squad as well that are greatly benefiting the Detroit Tigers, and that's Tommy Kahnle, who apparently could play some first base in a pinch, and Gleyber Torres, who here's something fun. Gleyber Torres, and I wish he might have done something at the plate there and extras, but regardless, he is still like a really great at bat. He's a guy that when something like foolish happens, it's like surprising. And I love Dan being like, well, it's unusual for Gleyber Torres to X, because it's true. Like that's what I'm thinking as well, because that's how much confidence you have in him being at the plate. I love his reflexes there. I love his eye. And again, last at bat, notwithstanding 1.4 WAR. And that's obviously heavy on the hitting and fielding. I do believe, despite the metrics, has surpassed my expectations to this point. Had a nice sliding play today. So I want to give him credit for that. But Tommy Kahnle, Cody, 1.1 WAR right now, and he is on the very, 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 very short list of guys that AJ has trust in the most high leverage of situations. Obviously, Will Vest being the other one, but I think it's like. They were signed at different points in the off-season period, but I could tuck myself into both in terms of who is the more valuable addition to this point. So I don't know. I guess I'll just ask you, who's been the more valuable addition to this point between these two?
Well, they both have been valuable, and they've both been pretty close to the best case scenario you could have asked when you signed them. So they both deserve a lot of credit. Scott Harris and the front office deserve a lot of credit for identifying these guys as fits. My answer would still be Gleyber. Maybe I'm just biased toward the hitter, but Gleyber has a 379 on base percentage, Kieran. Something the Tigers lacked was a guy who could have a 379 on base percentage. Even Riley Green, Spencer Torkelson, Kerry Carpenter at their best just aren't really that type of guy. Gleyber, I guess career-wise, hasn't quite been that, but he's been a very reliable on-base bat. That's why they signed him, and he's right now doing getting on base as well as he has at any point in his entire career. We've talked about the leadership aspect. Something else that was kind of an obvious void was just a stable veteran presence. He's brought that. He's not a perfect player, but I've been pleasantly surprised with how this team looks and feels with him on it. And the best version of this Tigers team had to have an above average offense to make the playoffs, let alone be the best team in baseball. They had to get above, kind of just league average offense, and they've done that. And Gleyber Torres is a big reason why they've done that. Having a right-handed bat to exist kind of in between Riley Green or Kerry Carpenter or anywhere in the top of that order, I think alters the calculus for opposing managers every single day. Kahnle's been really good, and when the bullpen has kind of been leaking oil lately, it's really important to have a guy like that. But I think ultimately, you could probably find another reliever to pitch really well. The Tigers happen to be kind of masters at finding other random relievers to come in and pitch really well. I just feel like Gleyber has been more rare, more valuable, harder to replace or replicate what he has brought to this team than Kahnle. But that's not to disparage Kahnle at all, because he's been awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always gonna go toward the hitter as well, but at the same time, like, as thin or less reliable than you would have anticipated coming into this year with some of the bullpen pieces. Because again, when he was signed, you thought Foley was going to be in the mix for late inning leverage, and he's become. I guess I guess you said they're close to best case scenario, but Kahnle's best case scenario has become more valuable than what you signed him for. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like the scale,
it's very true.
the scale has moved a little bit in his favor on that. And one of the things I like is that they're both remarkably kind of simple ball players. It's like, all right, yeah, Torres gets on base.
Yeah.
And works in at bat well. Again, like, because we're saying it today, but it's true. And then Kahnle, like, all right, here's about 8 changeups to every fastball, and that's it. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it for their games. But it's so effective. It's so valuable that, like, they both deserve kind of being hoisted up there as, like, this team is nowhere close to where they're at right now without both of them. And so, like, the Torres thing was shocking. Kahnle, it's like, all right, here's another reliever. Like, we'll see. That stuff kind of happens every year, but it's still kind of a it's still a credit, like you said, to the front office for being able to identify correctly. These are the kind of guys that fit very well with what we're trying to do. So if you're feeling Scott Harris as, some top executive, and you're making arguments with your buddies, these are 2 moves that ought to, be near the top for this specific season. So just want to give them their flowers a little bit. Real quick, little some transaction stuff that happened in the minor leagues. We don't do a whole lot of minor league stuff, but Troy Melton, someone that we've kind of sparsely mentioned on this podcast, gets up from Erie to Toledo. And then Kenny Surwa, who is most known as the hard-throwing knuckleballer, goes from West Michigan to Erie. So if you're looking for names that might be coming up sometime, might be kicking down the door, obviously Melton is on that list. And who knows? Who knows with Surwa? Who knows?
Melton was one of my picks to click before the year. He's kind of lived up to it. His stuff is pretty nasty. A lot of velo, a lot of ride on that fastball. Got some secondary offerings that are pretty nasty too. So he's going up to AAA, and especially given the state of the Tigers pitching, I think he's knocking on the door. I think we saw how quickly the Tigers bumped Dylan Smith up to the big leagues. Troy Melton could be right there. I think the question is, like, is he going to start pitching full on in relief anytime soon? Will he remain a starter? We know the Tigers don't like to switch guys just for the sake of switching them, but there's going to be, I don't know. I say there's more of a need in the bullpen. Maybe there's a need for him as a starter. I don't know. I think Troy Melton is going to be in the big leagues maybe as soon as July, assuming this stuff continues to play because it's big league stuff. It's electric. From what I hear, the organization really likes him. Kenny Serwa, the viral knuckleballer. I think all of us saw the video, and I don't think any of us knew what to expect. It's like, all right, that's sick. Is this like,
This
can he
is
actually
fun.
get hitters out? Is he actually going to pitch like in games? Like, he's 26, 27. Where do you start him? Well, high West Michigan. Granted, he's facing a lot of hitters younger than him, but he had a 2.75 ERA in 10 starts. That's some pretty nice outings. He's got a little more to polish up, but seems well deserving of a bump up to Double A. And then you start thinking about it, Kieran, he doesn't just throw a knuckleball, he throws 94. Not many knuckleballers who also can come at you with 94. I was actually out in West Michigan a little bit this week, talked to a couple of the guys. We'll have some stuff eventually on Serwa. Obviously, a fascinating story. And yeah, like the reviews are just good. It's interesting. You know, you don't want to proclaim anything, but he might have a little more of a future than I think a lot of people would have initially guessed just the day the Tigers signed some kid who had a cool YouTube video.
Again, maybe the number one lesson that everyone should kind of go back to all the time is that it's not really anything done that doesn't have a pretty sizable plan behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So like maybe a lot of this stuff might be more by design than we realize in the moment. So fascinating to see what happens there. I agree with you on Troy. Really curious to see how long they kind of, how many times you want to throw in AAA. You know what I mean? So
Right.
so I agree. I think it could be a guy that we see with the old debut patch here, maybe sooner rather than later. All right, Chicago series. I don't want to like preview the series, but I just want to say that I am looking forward to seeing like a little bit more juice because you're at home. You're playing one of the best teams in baseball. I would say historical rivalry in a way, and probably people don't look at it that way. But if you look at the history of baseball, these teams been in the World Series decent amount of time. All right. So I like that element. The whole Midwest Chicago Detroit rivalry is a thing. Anyway, I hope there's a lot of juice in the ballpark this weekend. And of course, no better way to kick it off than with the School Bowl day. So we will be reporting back what kind of environment was over at Comerica Park because I'll be very curious to see what happens there. So anything else, Cody, before we jet out?
No, I think it should be a fun weekend. Like you said, chance for really good crowds. I think kind of the first true like summery weekend, 3 days, you're gonna have temperatures mid 70s. Forecast looks fairly clear. Like maybe some good weather, some good vibes. You're gonna have a Scooball day mixed in there, which doesn't hurt. I'm looking forward to seeing a little Pete Crow Armstrong, not a
Yeah.
guy that I've seen in person since he became PCA. He has been one of the more electric players in baseball so far this season. So I'm excited to see what he's going to do, see how the Tigers will plan to attack him.
All right. Yep. I'm looking for a nice little bounce back and you got the Cubs in town. So let's see if they can win 2 more games against the Chicago team. Difference is this is a 3-game series. All right. You can follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Cody Stavenhagen. I'm at Kieran_Steckley. Pod page at Tiger Territory _YouTube, Instagram, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Like, rate, subscribe, review, all that good stuff. You guys know what to do, and we appreciate all of you. So for Cody Stavenhagen, I'm Kieran Steckley. Everybody have a great day.